The house does not shout for attention. It exhales, slowly, like a cedar warmed by the sun. This is the story of Elena Carter, an architectural historian who spends her days writing about the spaces we inhabit and the quiet ways they shape our lives. When she first crossed the threshold of the East London terrace she now calls home, she was not simply searching for shelter. She was searching for dialogue, between history and invention, between her academic eye and her personal longing. Elena had grown accustomed to looking backward. Her profession required it, tracing the lines of Georgian cornices, reading the layered scars of industrial warehouses, standing still in the dust of once bustling factories. London had always been a city of sediment, each era piled upon another. But she wanted something different for herself. Not a museum piece to inhabit, but a living canvas. When the small Victorian terrace came onto the market, it was modest to the point of anonymity. A thin brick facade, a narrow hallway, rooms divided like sealed boxes. The garden stretched long and unkempt, brambles clutching at a tired shed. Yet Elena saw possibility. She remembered summers spent in California during her postgraduate years, the warmth of open-plan living, homes that dissolved into gardens, the honesty of timber and glass. What if, she thought, this unassuming East London house could hold a fragment of that sun-soaked clarity? She bought it not for what it was, but for what it might become. The transformation began with light. The existing house was heavy with partitions, shadow pooling in corners. To undo it, Elena enlisted the help of a small architectural practice, who shared her vision. To bring the easy openness of mid-century California into dialogue with the narrow terraces of East London. The process was not without struggle. Planning restrictions tightened the imagination. The rhythm of the neighboring houses could not be ignored. The challenge was to balance reverence for the street as Victorian bones with an unapologetic gesture toward a different horizon. They began at the rear, extending into the garden with a low-slung pavilion. Flat-roofed, clad in warm cedar, it whispered rather than announced itself. Wide panes of glass slid back, erasing the threshold between inside and out. Polished concrete floors absorbed the daylight and gave it back as a muted glow, like river stones under shallow water. The old and the new met in careful conversation. Where the original hallway still held its narrow Victorian proportions, the extension opened into breadth and air. Moving through the house became an act of release, compression, then expansion. Inside, details carried the weight of intention. Bespoke joinery in walnut nodded to Californian modernism. A brickwork hearth, left exposed, anchored the living space with texture and permanence. Skylights punctured the flat roof, tracking the movement of clouds across the day. At times, the process tested her patience. Budgets strained, materials arrived late. The inevitable dust settled into her hair and books. But each decision, each compromise, became part of the story. She resisted the temptation of pure replication. This was not Palm Springs transplanted wholesale into Hackney soil. It was interpretation, filtered through London's climate, history, and scale. The terrace had been stitched into a new rhythm, its heart beating differently now. What makes the home remarkable is not its surface beauty, though it has plenty of that. It is the way it reconciles contradictions. The Victorian terrace was once built for privacy, for small rooms to contain heat and habit. The Californian inspiration, in contrast, breathes openness, invites sunlight, erases the line between domestic interior and the living world beyond. In this house, those two instincts are layered without canceling each other out. Elena often reflects on this duality. At her writing desk in the extension, she looks out to the garden, where grasses sway against the cedar cladding. Behind her, the hallway still speaks in the language of the 19th century, with its slender staircase and narrow doors. She inhabits both eras at once. There is also something profoundly personal in the space. The Californian qualities recall her younger self, the summers of independence and possibility, the optimism of a different landscape. To bring that memory into East London is to weave her past into her present, grounding it in the soil of her adopted city. And yet, it is not a solitary space. Friends gather here, drawn by the fluidity of the extension, the ease with which conversations stretch into the garden. Children run loops between the old rooms and the new, as if testing the stitches of the architectural seam. The house has become a stage for lives intersecting, rather than a shrine to design. Culturally, too, it speaks of something larger. London is a city of borrowings, of ideas carried across oceans and reinterpreted. This house is one more fragment in that collage, a Californian horizon refracted through East London brick. It belongs not to one tradition, but to many. And in that hybridity lies its poetry. Perhaps that is what Elena loves most, that the house is never finished. Light changes it. Seasons change it. The growth of the garden alters it. The architecture holds steady, yet it yields constantly to the movements of time. She finds herself listening to it, as one might listen to a piece of music that reveals new details on each replay. The extension, she realizes, is less about California itself than about a sensibility. The courage to open, to simplify, to let the outside in. And in East London, where sky and brick so often press close, that courage feels almost radical. In the quiet hours of evening, when the cedar darkens and the glass turns to mirror, the house feels like a held breath, a space suspended between continents' histories and selves, waiting always to be lived into once more.